All right, we are back here on the podcast. Moving over to the Nets right now. You just heard Ein Eagle and Sarah Kustak break down the Harlem Globetrotters as dunk from Kevin Durant and company in the regular season finale. Joining me today to break down the Nets-Celtics series, friend of the podcast, big NBA guy, Martino Puccio is here. Martino, how are you?
Not bad, Mike. Weather is heating up over here in the Northeast, so I'm very excited about that. And my guy Jason Tatum had, the best ever playing tournament game, so not too bad.
Yeah, how do you feel about the play-in tournament? Now we're recording on Thursday. We've seen the first East and West matchups here. How do you feel about that?
I don't know. I think I'm okay with it considering the season that it's taken place in. If it was in any other season, I probably wouldn't have been a big fan. But it's a hit. Like, how could you not say it's anything but that? Considering outside of the Hornets Pacers game, but last night they got exactly what they wanted with the Warriors and Lakers. And then again, with you have a guy like Tatum step up like that. And even then you still have Westbrook and Beal, who are big stars in their own rights in a game like that. So it's just the perfect amount of exposure and intensity early on, because we don't really see that from teams that are kind of placed in that seeding area, because we usually just see them get swept or losing 5. So it was a different change of pace.
Yeah, I like it because I like the intensity. I know the NBA is probably the hardest sport to get a game 7 too, because the talent level usually wins out in terms of these two teams. They're not playing each other in series. So I get the idea of hey, let's try and get some elimination games on. I think this is the model. MLB, I know they want to expand the playoffs. They should take notes. I think this is what you do with you want to expand the playoffs and do this kind of format, not the whole we're going to play 3-game series and teams pick their opponent. I think this is the better way to do it.
Yeah, I was always I've been kind of beating the drum the past couple of years of wanting at least a 5-game series, just like the division series does in baseball. Just do that. Just stop giving the better teams more chances to make up for, being poor, if they're poor in their first couple of games or something. That will increase the chances of it. It makes the intensity of all these games that much better. I know the NBA doesn't want to give up potential, 7-round series because that's less games and less TV money. But let's be real here. 5 games is plenty for when we're having a 1 versus an 8. It's more than enough. More likely than not, the team that's the 1 seed is going to win. The only reference we have is the Warriors beating the Mavericks. How long ago? That's when Baron Davis was a leaper still. So, I mean, again, there really aren't that many examples to disprove it. But again, it's about money. So I understand why they're at where they're at.
Yeah, it's different with the NHL, because the NHL, it's obviously it's a physical game. The hockey intensity goes up in knots. You get game 7s all the time. You do not need to see the Sixers going to whitewash whoever comes out of that game tonight between the Wizards and the Pacers. We don't need to see them beat them brains in for 4 games.
It's just we're just delaying the inevitable. It's just I don't know. It's the way basketball has always been though. So I mean, it's kind of hard to ask to have less when you already had more, because you just lose money at the end of the day. Listen, I won't even really pay attention to that series. I'll be honest with you. What's there to pay attention to? It'll only be interesting if the Sixers are showing some sort of vulnerability, but I don't expect that, especially in that series.
I don't either. Let's talk about the Nets, obviously, because I did the Knicks early in the podcast and Mark Berman talk about the Nets-Celtics series, and I think this Nets season as a whole is very interesting because they came in with big expectations. They got much higher when they made the James Harden trade, but we've barely seen these guys play, so I think it's been an interesting ride for the Nets this year.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much you can go off of. It's his first season back. Kyrie always has injuries. He takes more time off than any other athlete for personal reasons, whether it's mental health issues or just, family related stuff. He's just been taking care of himself, and that's fine. But again, at the end of the day, you lose Spencer Dinwiddie to the injury that he had, obviously the James Harden trade. There's no continuity. On top of Steve Nash coaching his first ever team, Mike D'Antoni's basically an offensive coordinator for them. It's just a lot for them to do. But when you look at the talent, they have the best dribbler of all time. And he's also one of the better scorers of his generation, in my opinion. James Harden and Kevin Durant are 2 of the 5 best scorers of the past 30 years, bar none. It's not even a conversation. 2 of which are MVPs. So again, And then having Blake there as well, Blake Griffin, just to have an opportunity for him to be on a team like this to contend is great to see. So again, who knows what to expect come this playoffs. But again, like with all that talent, it's really fascinating to see how they manage it because it made a lot more sense with other fits with the big three. This felt a little bit more forced than most big threes that we've seen. Like with KG, Ray Allen, Paul Pierce, they were all a perfect fit together. The same with the Heat, the same with the Warriors too. Like that, the amount of space that they had on their offense, the movement, it was just so fantastic and it was calculated. With this, it's a lot of different types of players and a little bit more ball dominant with Kyrie and James, even though Harden can obviously play off ball. But again, it's really tough when you have all those variables and you don't play that consistently together.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, going into this series, obviously they had injuries as Durant had the hamstring issue, Harden had his own hamstring issue, and this team, the Big Three played 8 games together. Like, how big a deal do you think that is as we get into the playoffs?
I think it's a big deal. But again, when you look at all the other teams in general, a lot of these teams have not had that much continuity throughout the season. We mentioned that, but the team that they're playing, my Celtics, they're not even going to have Jaylen Brown. And even then, they didn't even have all their starters play together, the big four basically that you would call it with Tatum, Brown, Kemba, and Marcus Smart. There was just no continuity there either. Same thing with you go with the Heat. I mean, the Bucks are the Bucks. They've been able to stay healthy. Even the Sixers have as well. But even then, those two teams are the ones with the biggest question marks come playoff time because we always hype them up with the amount of talent that they have, but they never have made it to a finals or gone to a game 7 of a conference finals. So it's really just at the end of the day, we're kind of looking at a lot of question marks in the East and even in the West as well because, the Suns are there. This is their first time in years that they've been making the playoffs. The Lakers, as we just saw yesterday. I mean, there's just so many question marks. If there was ever a perfect year for the Nets to have this many question marks, it's probably this one.
Yeah, I think another question mark they do have is on the defensive end because, as we know, they're not good defensively. Durant is not what he was defensively coming off the injuries. They never really got that rim protector. He's got a bunch of bigs sort of getting them minutes down low. Do you think the defense issues are a big deal? It might not be in this year. I think down the road they could have problems.
I think down the road it's going to present problems. But again, how many times have we seen regular season teams that are relatively poor or mediocre defensively turn it up come playoffs? It's just such a common theme now because a lot of teams and players know, hey, if we get home court advantage, at least for the most part, then it doesn't matter how great our defensive ratings are and intensities, as long as we're able to flip a switch. With the Nets, it's not really the case, in my opinion, as you mentioned with KD. He's just not going to ever be the same player of, 82 games, going to be bringing it every single night for 35 plus minutes if he's even able to play that. He's just old, and now he's got these soft tissue injuries, coming off an Achilles. And don't forget, he used to have foot issues as well back with the Thunder. So it's nothing completely new with him. It's hard to sustain that. On top of Kyrie having the injuries that he has, it's going to take a lot. There's an argument that KD is their best defensive player, and that's not something I love. But at the end of the day, if you can't stop a team from scoring, then it doesn't really matter how many points you give up because they're more than likely to score more points than you.
Yeah, I think that's true. And this first round, they get the Celtics, who obviously you said they won the play-in game. Jason Tatum dropped 50 on the Wizards. People, obviously, you tuned out of the NBA this year. You go back to the ball, it's like, oh, the Celtics in the conference finals. They're dangerous. As you said, no Jaylen Brown. This team's not played great defense. Like, what has gone wrong for the Celtics this year?
I think it's just like most of those teams that went late into the bubble. There's just a lot of lingering issues with minutes. There's injuries piling up. I don't think I've said this about Kemba Walker ever since that injury surfaced prior to COVID striking last year. The guy's never going to be the same. He's never going to live up to the amount of money that he's getting paid currently on his contract. And it's not necessarily his fault, but this is what happened with small guards over the course of their career when they reach over the age of 30, that he can't even be playing back-to-back nights where they're fighting to try and get to those top 6 seeds, that Kemba Walker is incapable of playing back-to-back nights because they have to load manage his knee. The whole point of that is to get him into the playoffs so he could play these back-to-backs or these games that you don't have to play these extra games like the play-in tournament because of his knee. So again, Jason Tatum, I mean, he's played as great as you can when you have to inhale an inhaler prior to every single game. Jaylen Brown was fantastic when he was able to play. Unfortunate injury. Marcus Smart had that tennis injury, the calf issue against the Lakers in that one game. Obviously, that was really difficult for him. And the bench is terrible. I've said it from the beginning of the season, and even last year I didn't love it. Danny Ainge comprised this bench of a bunch of very young players that are, one, inexperienced, two, not that talented, and three, they're just not ready for this moment. It's a lot on their plate for this. And honestly, when you see guys like Grant Williams having to step up and into a rotation, or Semi Ojeleye, it's just not good enough to get to the conference finals. It's definitely their weakest one in a while. They'll be able to free up some stuff. Eventually, I think they'll try and re-sign Evan Fournier. But right now, I mean, Grant Williams, Peyton Pritchard, as good as Pritchard has been, again, it's just Peyton Pritchard can't be your 7th or 8th guy in the rotation. Not this year. If he was like the 9th or 10th guy, if anyone ever goes 10 deep, but at least 9, then you would be okay with it. It's just the bench is significantly weak, and especially when they have to take on more minutes during the regular season because your main 4 guys are missing time due to injuries. So at the end of the day, it just kind of stockpiles, and it's a domino effect. And this is what they get. Just only a game or two over 500 during the regular season. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't expect much this year.
Yeah, for sure. This is also an interesting spot for the Nets because this year you figure they're going to win pretty easily. And you look at the fact they've had so little playing time for their guys, you wonder, like, this, in a way, sort of like an extended regular season format for them where they can use these games sort of tune up and get the big 3 and more minutes together. I think that's something you could look at in this series.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to figure out late game rotations, who starts a fourth quarter, who ends a third quarter. It's kind of all that stuff that you have to manage. And especially KD, like, do they want to push Kevin Durant to play a certain amount of minutes in this series? Because I think anything less than a sweep is a mess for them. Even, maybe they get one game because Tatum's great and they can't play defense and say their shooting's a little bit off. The Celtics are a bottom 10 team in 3-point percentage defense. There's no excuse that the Nets shouldn't steamroll them. So again, I think they have to come out, like you said, and have like a game plan that works well for later in these playoffs. But again, the second they lose a game or some of these games become closer than they need to be, that's where pressure starts to mount in a sense, because teams that are going to be competing for the conference finals and the finals are going to see a chink in the armor. And that's very limited time for the Nets, and especially a rookie head coach like Steve Nash, to figure out. So I think they have more than enough talent to do it, but there's potentially all those question marks that they don't want to have.
Yeah, and obviously you said this year's not going to go very long. I said Nets in 5. I figured Jason Tatum will be hot enough. They'll steal one game with him playing well. So your opinion, what has to happen here for the Celtics to make this interesting without Jaylen Brown?
To make it interesting without Jaylen Brown, Evan Fournier has to shoot the way he shoots. Prior to joining the Celtics with the Magic, he was almost like a 50, 40, 90 kind of player. He wasn't that high with the free throw percentage, but he was shooting fantastic from the field and beyond the 3-point arc. For that, he needs to show up. The bench rookies and players like Aaron Nesmith, Romeo Langford, if Robert Williams is even able to go with his turf toe issue, he needs to step up. It's all those guys. I'm not really worried about Marcus Smart bringing his intensity and great defense. Kemba, I'm weary of because he's going to have to really play a lot of minutes in this for them to have a chance. But this is all about Jason Tatum. It's about Jason Tatum taking a leap and bearing this burden of not having a fellow all-star with you, having an aging point guard who's, got knee issues. The same thing with Evan Fournier as well. He's been a little inconsistent. And all these young guys. If he is able to step up and average at least 30 a game in this series, that in itself is a major sign down the road for the Celtics that, okay, we know he can handle a team like this, that no one's going to blame him for losing this series. If he has something similar, and I'm not saying of the same level to what LeBron did years ago, get to Game 7 against the Big Three of the Celtics the year they won the title, But keeping his team competitive while being one of the 2 or 3 best players on the floor is a massive win for the Celtics because you know what you have. I think we already know what they have at the end of the day, and he could beat Kobe Bryant's record for most points by a player by the age of 22 in playoff history. Now he's going to have to get to game 6 or 7 in order to do that and average around like high 20s, early 30s in points. But again, for me, it's just all about the legacy and seeing if Tatum's able to take this next step, similar to what Luka Doncic did against the Clippers last year. If you're just able to keep it a real competitive series by dominating on both sides of the ball, then it's a win for me. As much of a win you can get in a series that you lose in.
Yeah, you as a big Celtic, even you know this, they're not winning this series, like barring something very freaky.
If they win this series, this is the biggest upset of a series win since the Mavericks lost to the Warriors. Yeah. Absolutely. There's literally no excuse for it. You have 2 players that are top 5 of a generation, arguably. And on top of Kyrie Irving, and then all the other bench pieces, like there's no excuse for the Nets.
Yeah, barring injury.
So like not win this in 5. But even honestly, like if it's one injury to these guys, they shouldn't lose.
Yeah,
they shouldn't. I think they have more than enough.
I'd say it's catastrophic. It's like they have 2 of the big 3 go out in the series. That's why I think it gets.
Oh yeah. Well, so yeah, like Warriors against the Raptors.
Yes.
Yeah. It has to be that. And even then, yeah. No, I mean, then it's just a battle of like who the best player is at that point, depending on who it is.
Yeah.
I think the one player they can't afford to lose, honestly, is James Harden. Because I think they've shown they've been able to win without that. But Kyrie is a bigger issue. Kyrie's been the actual most healthy one out of all of them and carrying them, which is odd to say because he's usually the guy who misses the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now they're like soon they're getting through. They got to look at some path of Milwaukee, Philadelphia, maybe the Knicks if the matchups break right in this.
I wouldn't even count out the Heat, to be honest, either.
Yeah, the Heat could be in the mix there too. I mean, this feels like a year where a lot of these teams are flawed. I feel like this is a year where if you're a Nets fan and you don't at least get to the NBA Finals, it's a major disappointment considering like the type of talent you put together and knowing that the window on this team is not very big despite the fact you had 5 top scorers in the league.
You're right. There's a bunch of injuries piling up. Kyrie is approaching 30. Harden's over that. And the same thing with KD. On top of all these bench players that they have, they're not going to have many assets in the future because they traded them. You're right. It's a win now window. It might be 2 to 3 years, like another 2 years after this that they'll have. But you're right. There's a lot of flawed teams in here. I can't take the Bucks seriously with Budenholzer still in there. I still don't think he realizes what it takes to win. In the same sense, I don't think they still have enough star power outside of Giannis, even though I really respect Middleton, their bench, and Drew Holiday. I don't think that's enough. The Heat, I think it was the perfect storm in the bubble for them. I still think they'll make a lot of series competitive. I wouldn't be shocked if they win a series. And with the Sixers, again, kind of hard to trust Doc Rivers at the end of the day because he's the guy who's coached the most teams that have blown through 1 series leads. So it's nothing new with him. Again, I wouldn't be shocked if the Sixers made it to the finals. I think it's down to those 2, but that's going to take a lot from Ben Simmons. I think they'll play a good enough defense and Embiid will dominate. It's just going to be at the end of the day who has the best 2 players in that series. And the Nets, for their sake and those players' legacies, they better step up and be the best players on the court in that one. Because the amount of pressure that they'll have strictly from not making the finals will be insane. Because I don't think they'll ever win the finals then at that point.
Yeah, I think you have to at least get there this year. I mean, if you run into let's say LeBron and the Lakers get on a buzzsaw run, they get there and they beat you. I mean, you can kind of shrug your shoulder and say it's tough. We're dealing with the best player and potentially ever play the game, and I don't get you there. But if you're getting knocked out by like Milwaukee in the second round or by the Sixers in the conference finals, that's a tough pill as well.
You can't if you don't make the conference finals, then it's pathetic in my eyes. And also again, even to not make it to the NBA finals is also pathetic in my opinion. You can't have this many talented players and not make the finals. There's just no excuse for it, especially with the way everyone talks about these certain players. Like comparing James Harden better than Dwayne Wade, saying KD is a top 10 player of all time, Kyrie's exceptional. He's an all NBA player when he's healthy throughout a whole season. There's just no excuse for it. We've seen these guys step up on the biggest stage, maybe not Harden so much compared to the other 2, they got to do it. There's a lot on the line legacy-wise, and they've been under a lot of pressure for a large part of their career, especially Kyrie as well after leaving LeBron. There's a lot more pressure than people think, and that's the worst part too, because if you go into a series and you have more pressure than LeBron James does, you're not beating him. And I've maintained this whole time that the Lakers are winning it. It's really upsetting. I really hoped they would have lost last night, but the second AD gets going, they're a deeper team than they were last year, and it's LeBron James. Like you're not beating them.
Yeah, I mean, even if they did lose last night, the Lakers, they were not going to lose to Memphis in the second game. You just knew that was not going to happen.
No, they weren't. They weren't. But anything to make the Lakers' path harder and more difficult, I'm all for it. And also just the elevation of Steph's legacy too.
Yeah.
Which I think it's great to see, because I think there's been a lot more respect for him now than people didn't want to have because of who he's played with over the course of his career.
Yeah, I also think you're right about James Harden too, as being a big playoffs for him, because I mean he's probably on probably the most talented team he's ever had, and I guess that if Chris Paul doesn't hurt his hamstring, they beat the Clippers and go to the conference finals.
I mean, they make 4 threes even out of the 32 or 29 that they took.
Yeah,
they're in it. And it wasn't even that one. It goes back further where he had like the most turnovers prior to like KD joining them. I think it was the first year the Warriors made it to the finals. Where he dribbled off a ball off his leg. It was just, I mean, listen, he's one of the greatest scorers of all time. I think he's one of the best playmakers of all time too. He just hasn't had that moment where he gets over the hump, and I kind of feel for him, because I do agree with you. Like, they're probably beating the Warriors at that point. Like, he got hurt in 6 and 7. One of the greatest point guards of all time is missing from a game. That's a valid excuse. I don't care what anyone tells me. It's a very big deal when a top 5, arguably point guard of all time is not in the lineup against that team. I mean, what can you say?
Yeah, I also think with him, also, it might be a hidden benefit because he played so many minutes during the regular season those years. In fact, he missed so much time this year with the hamstring. It might be a little fresher come playoff time.
Maybe. Off of that. And the best thing is, too, you could sit these guys during certain rotation. Like James Harden, we seen him. Those were not deep Rockets teams. He could lead a team for stretches. That's how good he is. If you have Kyrie and KD sit down, Harden could carry an offense or put guys into spots that are, relatively talented. They're not awful players that they have on the bench. It's just not that deep, like 10, 12 players deep. Obviously, a lot of teams aren't like that. But he's good enough to lead it. Especially, I mean, the Rockets were great at putting guys in positions that didn't have, multi-talented skill sets, but they had enough of a skill set that they could exploit what they're good at, kind of like what the Athletics have done over the years in baseball. He could do it for 8 minutes. Kyrie needs a rest, fine. James Harden is leading your offense. How many players do you want leading your offense over him? It's like maybe 3 guys, maybe at the most. There's not that many. So again, I think they'll be fine. Steve, and that comes down to Steve Nash. Does Steve Nash know how to navigate around that? Does D'Antoni help him out to an extent? Because Mike's been in these situations where he has these high octane offenses and they don't get over the hump. And like we said, he got unfortunate luck with the CP3 injury, but there's just a lot of pressure riding on it. And I think they'll be able to make it to the finals because these guys are just way too talented.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's interesting to see what happens with them in the playoffs here. Martino, thank you for taking the time to come on. I appreciate it. Before I let you go, how can you follow social media, keep on some of the stuff you're doing?
Yeah, you can just follow me at Martino Puccio on Twitter. Soccer season's winding down. Obviously, there's a ton of Mets stuff, too. I mean, what is it now? Isn't it like 16 players if you count some of the options that they had in AAA with Syracuse as well? So, I mean, listen, I think the Mets are going to win the division. I've maintained this for a while that they've had a shot at it. They just need to get healthy. A team that's able to go down to, I know I'm kind of making this a little bit about the Mets, but if you're able to go down to Atlanta and win 2 out of 3 with, a quadruple A lineup is a generous way of putting it. And Lindor's hitting under 200. I mean, watch out for them because they get 2 potential all-stars back. And I mean, if you really want to count DeGrom, getting him back. And I think they're going to make a trade come summertime. So again, yeah, I'll be tweeting a lot about the Mets and who knows what happens with the Jets and all that stuff eventually. But yeah, you go follow me on there.